Those are the basics. Let's get into all this because the procedure takes maybe minutes, but then it's permanent. Boys are never given a say in their own lives, in their own bodies. For many, circumcision is a religious practice. For most of us, though, at least in the U.S., it is purely elective. Some people fiercely oppose it, the intactivist. While it's an easy enough viewpoint to find online, if you Google, you may not have heard the argument in real life or, completely stated. So I spoke with Brendon Marotta. He's a filmmaker. He just made a documentary called American Circumcision that comes out in August next month, and he has deeply reported on that movement. What got you interested in circumcision?
I became interested in the subject a couple years ago when I was going through a period of reevaluating a whole lot of things that had happened to me growing up. And what interested me about this subject was that I could change my beliefs, I could change other patterns in my life, but this wasn't really something I could change. And that bothered me. And so I started researching and had an obsessive epiphany about it. And most of the people who you see who are activists on this issue have had this obsessive epiphany where they start obsessively researching the topic, where they go into everything that they can about it. And circumcision is an issue that affects men in America in the most personal way possible. It affects partners of men, it affects parents and people who are about to become parents. And yet we've never had a national discussion about it. So that made me really interested in the subject.
What were your major findings?
Some of the biggest things that I found were that in the majority of hospital circumcisions, anesthesia is not used or has not been used in the past.
I didn't know that.
Right. I mean, if you can imagine holding down a child and cutting into his genitals with no anesthesia, it's horrifying to see. And many of the activists I spoke to said that that was the thing that made them become an activist, was just seeing footage of that. The other thing that I found in the research was that, the foreskin is 10 to 15 square inches of tissue. It's the most erogenous tissue on a man's body. So there's a significant impact on sexuality. And then there's just the larger question of, do we even have the right to do this?
In the U.S., at least the people I've talked to as we've led up to doing this segment, it's like better safe than sorry.
In America, people are less aware that the rest of the world does not do this. And so there's been a cultural norm. And in the past, people got their information from their doctor or from television, and now they can do their own research.
Or from their parents.
Right. And so American culture is changing rapidly on this issue, and even now you're starting to see more mainstream sources pick up the idea that this is actually a human rights debate, not a medical debate.
At the end of the day, do you walk away with a feeling about this of whether Americans should rethink or at least critically think about doing this to little boys?
Americans absolutely need to have a national discussion about this, and keep in mind that when they make this decision for their child, or if they even consider making this decision for their child, many parents just say, I'm not going to even think about that at all. This is something that's going to impact their relationship with their child for the rest of his life.
Going forward, as this conversation does take a front seat in some other nations that we've seen, about whether maybe we should let men decide later on in their lives that that's what they want or not. Could you ever see something like that gaining traction in the U.S. legally?
It's already gaining traction. I mean, in 2012, there was an attempt to ban circumcision in the city of San Francisco, and that initial legislation helped inspire things like the later Cologne ruling and the potential ban in Iceland and Denmark. So I think it's a possibility. And it's also something for parents to consider, because think about how much our culture has changed in 20 years. 20 years from now, when your son is an adult, he may have a very different perspective on this issue than you do. So I think that's really important for people to consider. And I would say, too, that the debate now around circumcision is whether or not human beings have the right to make their own choices about their bodies. And among young people, that's a very easily accepted position.